Warning, the following video contains spoilers. If you don't want this episode spoiled for you, switch the video off now.
The Timeshift.
For an episode called Ascension of the Cybermen, there's a whole lot of Cybermen not ascending, but more on that point later. What did you think, dear listener, of this week's episode of Doctor Who? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll get back to you shortly, even directly in the comment section themselves, or towards the end of next week's video. And be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTube stuff that YouTube wants you to do, because YouTube is an increasingly scary place for small content creators. Support your local small content creator today. It does them a power of good. There's a lot to unpack with this week's episode, so let's go back and deal with the whole title problem. I know it may seem pedantic, but there's a great issue here that I think needs addressing. What exactly does Ascension mean, anyway? Alright, well, I know what it means, but I mean in the context of the title of this week's episode. The title suggests that they, or indeed the Lone Cyberman, is going to do something to make them greater, to make them better, to take them to the next level, physically, mentally, spiritually. But it doesn't do that. That doesn't really happen in this week's episode. Sure, the Lone Cyberman does some weird interfering stuff with some of the Cybermen in status, but he doesn't really explain what he's doing with that, aside from the whole, "Oh, what kind of Cyberman could make another Cyberman cry" line, or whatever the hell it just means. We don't actually see them ascending. All the Lone Cyberman really does is just switch them on, and that's it. They never really ascended as much as they just woke up. Is Ascension just meaning literally they ascended out of bed? I mean, if it turns out that they're going to be reborn into Time Lords or something like that next week, that would at least explain it, but that doesn't explain why the title is what it is this week. They're not ascending, they're just there. Sure, they're getting a new lick of paint, looking a lot more interesting with their weird mutton chops, but still, they're not ascending. Of course, if it's not the Cybermen that are ascending next week, then there's strong hints that it's going to be remaining humans. The remaining humans are going to become the Time Lords. The ship that they used to escape the Cybermen from that planet they're on has a large column in the middle of it, which is very much reminiscent of the TARDIS. So that could well possibly be a prototype. This strange mystical land that they're all supposed to be fleeing to connects to Gallifrey at some point in its history. Look, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, dear listener. I'm honestly not sure how I feel about the prospect of the Time Lords turning out to be highly evolved humans. I mean, it just doesn't settle well for me, and I'll probably reserve judgments on that until the end of next week, but here's one to consider. What if they aren't the original Time Lords, or the next generation of Time Lords? Not the new generation of Time Lords that's going to rebuild Gallifrey. What if the Master hadn't killed those original Time Lords? The original Time Lords would still be around and potentially not human. And had he killed them, and he wouldn't have ended up inadvertently creating the thing he wanted to destroy all along? Or something. I don't know. I smell smoke and my head's hurting. Oh. And another thing that stuck out to me with this week's episode, it's Graham's strange flub. His weird little slip of the tongue moment, which either means, "Oh my god!" level stuff, or alternatively, it means nothing at all. It's in that moment where he's having that conversation with one of the survivors, and she calls him Strange, and he replies, "Strange, I'm the most normal bloke you're ever gonna meet." And he says, "I'm the as though he's going to say, "I'm the Doctor," which it's not the first time that it's been teased that he might be the Doctor this season. In Spyfall, they mistake him for the Doctor. In Fugitive of the Judoon, Jack mistakes him for the Doctor. I may be clutching at straws here, but it was just a flub, but why didn't they pick up on that? Because it's the kind of flub which recontextualises so much. When I was doing theatre stuff, when I was doing scripted stuff back in high school and for a period in college, you had to know your script off by heart, because if you used the wrong word in the wrong moment, it could totally change the meaning and motive and the consequences of a scene, even if you yourself may not pick up on it on the time. And the fact that something like this, a blooper which could change everything if it turned out to be not a blooper, is left in, I mean, shouldn't they have just redone that just for the sake of it? Maybe do a couple extra takes for it? I honestly don't know. Maybe I'm just clutching at straws, but whatever. The whole flashback stuff. Yeah, at this point I think it's fair to say that that is the
Timeless Child.
And whilst that stuff was interesting, I'm not sure as though we needed to see as much as we did. The key moments in all that was him being found mysteriously, him being shot and surviving mysteriously, and him mysteriously being taken away in the end and zapped. All the in-betweeny stuff, as little as we actually saw of it, ultimately didn't matter, and I end up feeling that just ended up taking up screen time, which could have been used to better develop and spend more time with our cast and companions. Maybe that's just me being pedantic, I don't know, but next week I don't want to see any more flashbacks to the lives of the Timeless Child. We've set up the mystery there, let's just focus more for stuff next week. Because my big worry for next week, beyond anything else that may happen, beyond whether or not I like where this is all going in the end, my big worry is that we're going to get an episode which is going to feel really crammed, really stuffed, really over-bloated. Like Spyfall 2, we're going to get an episode which isn't really about stopping the main threat. Like in Spyfall, it wasn't really about stopping the Stenza or whatever the name was. All that stuff wasn't important. They were a secondary concern. The big important thing was about learning what the Master was up to and what happened to Gallifrey and setting up the mystery for this year's season. Same with Fugitive the Judoon. The stuff with the Judoon really didn't matter. What mattered was finding about Ruth and her being potentially regeneration post, present or future of the Doctor, and I worry that it'll be much the same next week, with the Cybermen ultimately being a secondary threat, where the Doctor learning about the Timeless Child and the origin of the Time Lords will ultimately be more important than actually saving her companions. Maybe they're going to do something with that. Maybe that ends up meaning that she doesn't save all the companions or something. We'll soon see about that. I feel that the next week's episode will be especially congested and extremely exposition heavy if that's the case, especially if we get more flashbacks with the Timeless Child. With all that out of the way, let us go to the overview and my overall feelings of this week's episode, and my feelings as to potentially where all this could end up going. Okay, so now the overview. What do you think about the episode as a whole? And as a whole, I have to say that it was a competent episode for what it is. But the fact that it's mostly all set up with very little in the way of actual payoffs does critically hurt it. Sure, I get the idea of them wanting to set up mysteries for next week and wanting to have a cliffhanger so that it can all be resolved next week for an epic grand finale, but nothing that is introduced this week is really resolved. Sure, they make it to Shangri-La or whatever that mysterious planet is called, but aside from that, nothing else. No character payoff moments, not even with characters within the episode itself. They all just kind of exist. They all just kind of there, so that next week we can have extended sequences with the Master and the Doctor off in some other place, apart from the place they in reality should probably end up being. Next week we are likely going to find out about the origins of the Time Lords. Even if the Timeless Child doesn't turn out to be the Doctor or Ruth, we're going to end up witnessing the origin of the Time Lords. Regardless of whether that's from Cybermen or whether that's from humans, that's probably what we'll end up going to. And regardless of how it's all explained, I'm still not entirely sure how I feel about all that. Granted, a lot of the groundwork stuff was laid out in books and as part of the unrealised Cartmel master plan, which ultimately was going to be resolved in the unproduced 1990 season. So, in a weird kind of way, we're wrapping up stuff from the classic era of Doctor Who, though why one would want to do it in the first place, I don't entirely know. The Doctor could still be the other, Ruth could still be the Season 6B Doctor, i.e. not pre-Hartnell, and maybe her memory was erased to stop her knowing too much about both her past and her future. I really don't know at this point, and where we'll go from here, I honestly don't know. From this point on, I mean, it's not like you can really do a season mystery next year where it's just the Daleks up to no good. Next year, we've got to try and build up from this. This year, we find about the origin of the Time Lords. Next season, what do we do next? What are next, as a certain YouTube video once asked. I do suppose, though, if they do make the Cartmel Master Plan some way canon, that may hopefully make people want to rewatch the McCoy run a little bit more. As much as I do have problems with that era and McCoy's run especially, I really don't feel that that season gets quite as much credit as it really deserves. There is another theory going around that next week's episode will end up tying into the teaser trailer which introduced Whittaker as the Doctor, given that she and the Master end up in a location that is seen in the trailer itself, which, if that's the case, then that means that Chibnall has a level of planning and ruse cruising that makes Stephen Moffat look like an amateur. And maybe, just maybe, that means a new costume for Whittaker's Doctor. Something that I feel that she's desperately needed pretty much from the moment we saw her costume for the first time. Granted though, when we first saw her costume in the series, up until that point I've been joking that it looks like she ram-raided a charity shop, and lo and behold, that's where she got a costume. But maybe we'll get a new one, we'll soon see. It's still, ultimately, kind of hard to feel the impact of the everything you know is a lie thing when we still don't understand what's really going on in the here and now. Again, I worry next week may be ultimately rather exposition heavy. But what did you think, dear listener? What do you think about this week's episode lot 2? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know in the comment section down below and I'll get back to you shortly, either written in the comments themselves or towards the end of next week's video. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell and do all the YouTube stuff that YouTube want to do, because YouTube is an increasingly scary place for small content creators. Support your local small content creator today. It does them a power of good. Ooh. And be sure to post any theories and speculations as to where you think this is all going in the end. Do you believe that the leaks are all true, all of it, and things are going to happen which may have me tearing my hair out next week? Or do you think something else will happen that is strange and weird and wonderful? Maybe we'll find out who Ruth is, maybe that won't be until next season. We'll soon find out. Next week I'll have my camera back so you'll be able to see what a mess I end up looking after it all. Maybe I'll just be so sad, dejected and miserable, I'll just sit there looking like a sad tub of Vaseline or something. I really don't know. This video has gone on for way too long, so we don't need to reflect on that analogy. So, thank you for watching, and goodbye!